So you want to be a backpacker, hey? Come here. You gotta learn this first. Whether it's your first trip, your 50th trip, or your 100th trip into the backcountry, understanding these few things and how to fit them into your plan will make every backcountry trip better and every backpacking trip more enjoyable. The key is, for your very first trip, is to be super cautious with these things and simplify them. So you want to take all of the aspects we're about to talk about and really simplify them so that you are able to enjoy your first trip out in the backcountry. And you're able to say, I did this thing, now let's do a different thing. Let's add complexity, let's add steps, let's add difficulty, let's add all of the things that make backpacking more and more challenging the more you do it. But let's start off with really paring it down and simplifying it. Before we get into the details of how to plan your trip and the things you need to consider when you're planning your trip, I want to make sure we touch base on safety. Whenever you go into the backcountry, I want to make sure you have your 10 essentials prepared. If you don't know what the 10 essentials are, go ahead and check out that video. I'll link up top and I'll put it in the comments. Understand what the 10 essentials are and know how to cover them off for yourself. The other two things I want to touch base on with regards to your safety are around wildlife. So knowing what wildlife is around where you're going to go, that's going to differ everywhere you go, and how to respond, how to react, how to mitigate it, how to keep them from experiencing you and you experiencing them in a negative way, as well as kind of your safety plan for yourself, to touch base with the people you know after you have a plan with what your plan is, so that they know where you are, what's going on. If for some reason, if something happens and you don't make it back to where you're supposed to be, they will be the people who know where you are and can contact someone to go look for you. I want to make sure that you understand to be a little bit flexible in that plan and have some contingency there, because my first random backcountry trip, I actually went to a place called Pickle Jar Lakes. It's one of my favorite places to go. On this map here, it is right there. And it was the first time I had made it solo into the backcountry in a random camping situation, and it was in my hammock, and it was a beautiful night, and I slept so well. Now, in part of my safety plan, I had told my family that I was going to be back within cell service probably around noon. Now, I didn't have a GPS with two-way communication at the time. I had an SOS, but I didn't have two-way communication, so I couldn't go back and forth. And I had told them I'd be back at noon. So when I woke up and I stretched and I had this beautiful lake in front of me and I was starting to eat breakfast and I checked my watch, it was 11 o'clock in the morning. I'd slept in way past what I expected to. And it's about a 2-hour hike out of Pickle Jar Lakes back to the highway, and then an hour drive back into cell service in Kananaskis. So I'm running down the hill, and I almost tripped on the hillside as it slopes down, and I almost fell down the hill and would have put myself in a really serious situation, at which point my family would have had to call someone to come get me. Now, that is because I didn't leave some flexibility in that. Make sure you leave space and time in there for you to relax and enjoy your trip. Your first step for planning a backcountry trip is most likely going to be picking a destination. And you are going to look at all sorts of websites, at all sorts of trails, and all sorts of things to find out where you want to spend the night. And when you're starting, this can be overwhelming. So let's simplify it a little bit and take some complexity out of that. There's really 3 or 4 things that when you're looking at a backcountry site or looking at a destination, things that you need to consider. There's 3 or 4 of them. The first one is probably where you're going to put your tent or your hammock. So you need to actually have an understanding somehow of what that area looks like. And one of the best ways to do that is to book a backcountry site. Backcountry sites that take reservations typically have a pad for your tent that allows you to really simplify your site making decisions. You don't need to watch 25 videos on how to pick the best backpacking site or what to look for in making your backpacking campsite trip better or pick better. You can just go, and there's predetermined places to camp. So really takes the decision making out of where do I set up my tent. They're flat, they're comfortable. It will make your time more enjoyable because you don't have to think about it, you don't have to process it, and it's already set up to be the ideal for what you're going to do. A lot of them have raised platforms, a lot of them are overlooking water and lakes and beautiful places. So the first thing is always to kind of get an idea of where you're going to camp, what the area looks like, and a backcountry site is perfect for that. Most backcountry sites are set up near a water source. Like I said, they have views over the lake or something, or they have a stream running through them. They're set up there for a reason, and it makes that easier and simpler for you. You don't have to think about it. The other thing is going to the washroom. They will have pit toilets or vault toilets or outhouses or something that allows you as a new backpacker not to have had to learn to poop in the woods. It's not something that's hard, but for a lot of people, it's a deterrent. It says, hey, I don't want to go backpacking because I don't know how to do that. And it is something you have to figure out. There's lots of videos on that, so go check those out. But I don't have any yet. And the last thing that it really simplifies is how to store your food safely, right? In the areas where there's bears or in the areas where there's a lot of critters or any of those things, they'll have bear bins and they'll have storage for you so that you don't have to learn how to hang a bear bag, and you don't have to learn how to bury your bear canister in some rocks so a bear doesn't just carry it away. And it just really simplifies the decision-making process and the gear choices that you make so that you don't have to worry about those things. On my very first backpacking trip, and the next probably 5 or 6, and probably still to this day, I'm always amazed at how much work it is. I mean, you don't have to be in peak physical form, but you do have to carry yourself and whatever you're bringing with you into the mountains, and that's hard work.
I'm hiking.
It's harder than walking to the store or whatever it is you're doing day to day. It takes a toll on your body, and it does some things. So it's really important after you've narrowed down your list of destinations to think about the route and how you're going to get there, because you can get halfway there and be so tired that you want to give up. And that is not how you want to enjoy the backcountry. You want to plan a route that allows you to get comfortably to your destination. I'm not saying easily, but comfortably and safely so that you can enjoy your time out there. So when you're looking at routes and you're narrowing down where you're going to go based on the routes, fit something that seems like it's within your skill set. And there's a few things you want to consider when you do that. Like trails. Is there a trail going where you're going? Some of the most incredible places to go don't actually have a trail. You have to find your way there on a trail and then go off trail to get there. If this is your first trip, I would not recommend that. Pick something that actually has a marked trail or a maintained trail on it. It's going to have more people around, you're going to be safer, you're going to be more comfortable, it's just going to make it better. Also, elevation. This is something that I totally neglected to look into when I first started backpacking, and it kicked my ass. I was not ready to walk up a hill like I thought I was. So really think about that when you're planning your first trip. And if you're looking at tools like AllTrails or Gaia or any of those things, when you pick your trail and you pick where you're going to go and how to get there, they're going to give you an outline of the elevation and the path and the route. I also think the terrain itself for that trail, what does it look like? Are you going across boulder fields? Are you climbing through the forest? Are you going to be in the shade? Are you going to be in the sun? Is it big flat open areas? Are there water crossings? That's something that you might not want to mess with on your first trip. So again, AllTrails is perfect for this. They have a trail preview feature where you go to the trail, you type in whatever site you want to go to or your route, and it actually, you can hit the button and it will take you on an example of that trip in kind of 3D, which is fantastic if you're planning a trip. The next thing on my list of things to consider when you're booking your first trip or you're planning your first trip cost me 3 overnight trips last year because I failed at this. And that's to plan for conditions. Now, I'm not saying like that you can control this, but you have a say on it. If you're in the Rocky Mountains and you're wanting to hike through water crossings in May, chances are those water crossings are going to be high flowing with all the runoff and the melt, and they're going to be fast and deep and silty, and it's hard to see the bottom, and they pose more risk. So let's simplify that. If you're planning your first trip, especially if you're planning solo, do not make it harder than it needs to be. Understanding the conditions where you are is probably the thing that I've failed at the most. And a great resource for this is AllTrails. Again, not because the site is great, but because the people on the site care. And those comments and the things that people write there, this was a beautiful trail, very, very scenic, no water. This was a beautiful trail, very, very scenic. It was muddy. This was a great trail, very, very scenic. We got stopped by an avalanche, so we had to turn back. This was a great trail, very, very scenic. We almost died because there's a washout and we missed it. Like those kind of things, and understanding the conditions of what is going on in that area at the time that you want to go is really important. The other side of that is the weather. We always look at the forecast and we think, okay, it's going to be beautiful out next weekend. I'm going to go next weekend. But if it rained for the 8 days leading up to the weekend, then that one beautiful weekend could just be mud and soup and grossness. So looking at the conditions before, looking at the conditions after, and looking at other people's feedback from the routes and the locations that you want to go can really simplify your decision-making process. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that you can control or you can plan the conditions, but you can mitigate how much of them impact your decisions. And you are going to run into a time where you only have that weekend off and you can't bail on the trip if you still want to go on a trip. So you have to go on that weekend, and it's been raining and gross and it's been horrible, and the forecast is for snow that weekend, and everyone has said that the trail's in horrible condition, but you've been planning this for months and it's your first trip and you just want to go to the mountains and you want to prove it. That's where gear comes in. Gear is the thing, and your plan for gear is going to be what mitigates the conditions. If it's going to rain, you have rain gear. If it's going to snow, you have warmer insulation. If it's going to be muddy, you have boots instead of trail runners. All of those things are decisions about gear that are going to mitigate the impact of the conditions on your trip. And I'm not here to tell you what gear to use. You are going to learn and figure that out on your own. Everybody's got a different solution. Everyone's got a different plan. Everyone's got a different preference. But when you're planning gear, it's really important to have a system or a checklist or a plan for what you're going to do with that gear. If you're interested in the details around that, check this video out. It runs through my whole system of how I plan my pack and what I'm going to bring and why I'm going to bring it and when I'm going to bring it and how I mitigate the conditions around my trips.